Hello, welcome to the YouTube channel. Today I want to talk about film restoration. What happens when a film is restored for newer formats, but the older version is subsequently erased? So I've got a few examples today, and I hope you will join me for this whole video as I dig into 4K transfers, Blu-ray transfers, and why I feel it isn't the best thing for film preservation. So thanks for joining me today. As I mentioned, I'm going to be talking about film restoration and why it's not the best for preservation overall. So let's start off with something I've talked a lot about on this channel, and that is Terminator 2. Now, this is, in a lot of collectors' eyes, the worst transfer of Terminator 2. And you might say, oh, it's one of the worst transfers of all time, but that's subjective because some people do prefer this. They prefer the way this looks, they prefer the overall fixes and changes that Cameron made. Obviously with Cameron, he's no stranger to criticism, and he doesn't mind a bit of criticism here and there for changes he might make. He's someone who's always chased technology and wanted to make his older films look new. Now obviously this film would have been shot on film grain, film stock. So when we talk about Terminator 2, we need to talk about the way it was shot and why moving it to a newer format like 4K would present more grain, more of a look that looks like film, but a lot of the general audience don't want grain. Now, me as a collector and a preservationist, I want that grain. I believe grain provides details. But with this, my biggest problem with this isn't necessarily what was done in terms of the transfer, it was more the color grain was changed, or color grade was changed. So Cameron had really changed a lot of what this film actually looked like in terms of colors. It looked more blue and bleak, and I mean, for Terminator you might want that, but my biggest problem is some of the sunset scenes, some of those Californian sunsets with the bright oranges, those were in large part downplayed. In some parts the color grade was completely redone to make it look more bleak, and it changes the overall vibe of the film. We'll move on to The Abyss and True Lies. These two movies have not had a release on a physical format since the DVD and Laserdisc days, and also VHS. These two movies are really one of those instances of they would have needed a restoration before moving it to a 4K format. But in doing that, AI was used. And it's obvious that AI was used because these were shot on film as well. I believe this was shot on Super 35mm. And I believe this one may have also been as well. But the problem with shooting on film is that you get film grain, and over time, film grain has a tendency to break down, colors fade. It's why something like Dragon Ball Z is so hard to restore in the modern age, because a lot of the film grain, a lot of the film stock that was filmed on has faded over time. The colors have changed, and it's hard to restore something like that when it's so badly broken down. But with True Lies and The Abyss, a bigger problem has emerged in terms of AI upscaling and AI restoration. Now, I don't think I have it in my collection, I don't, but we've seen something as well with Jaws 3, where AI is getting to the point now where film studios are just using it as a effect to put over the entire film, and it's guessing information that's not there, so AI is really struggling, and you see some like really horrendous restorations with Jaws 3 in particular. But I don't think these are horrendous. I don't think The Abyss and True Lies are horrendous transfers. But I would say, why is it not possible to put a HD version pre-restoration on these discs? I mean, some of these discs go up to, what is it? It goes up to 100 gigabytes now, these discs. And you're telling me you can't house the new 4K restoration on one disc and then the old theatrical version or the old look of the film on another disc? I mean, we've also got Aliens, which I haven't watched, but I've heard this one removes a lot of the grain as well. Now, obviously, this has had more transfers. You've got the Blu-ray there that obviously people compare this against. From what I've seen online and from the clips I've watched on YouTube, It does remove a lot of the grain, but it also makes it feel modern, which maybe will put some people off. But again, same situation where the Aliens movie doesn't have the original unaltered version on that disc. Now, before going any further, we need to talk about the Holy Trilogy. Star Wars, the original trilogy. How original are these? They do call it the original trilogy, but something like A New Hope was not called A New Hope initially. This was just Star Wars when it came out. They had not, I mean, Lucas may have been planning sequels, but it didn't have a title. It wasn't called A New Hope. It was just called Star Wars when it released. And obviously, over time, the New Hope title has been added to it. As much is this case with Indiana Jones, where it's now called Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. When it was first released, it was called Raiders of the Lost Ark. But something like this is problematic because it's so drastically changed that the original versions have essentially been erased and lost to history. Now, there are good things online that have tried to restore all of these. 4K77, the despecialized editions, there are people online trying to restore these to pre-1997 status, or theatrical status even. But when it comes to Star Wars, the big issue again presents itself. Why can it not be a situation of having the original on a disc and having the restored versions on another? Now, one thing with Star Wars comparing it to an older edition is the limited editions, 2006 limited editions that had the theatrical version unaltered as it was intended. Now, obviously, these are problematic because they were transferred from the Laserdisc, which had problems. But in terms of having the original available on another disc compared to the new restorations, this was, in a lot of eyes, the definitive way to watch Star Wars for many hardcore Star Wars fans who didn't want to pirate it, who didn't want to go online and download 4K77 or to despecialized. People wanted the money to go to the studio, and they voted with their wallets. And so I don't understand why, when Cameron does something like Terminator 2 where he drastically changes everything, why can he not have the original color grade, the original intended version of it, essentially just a scan and quick restoration to fix the holes in the film, what needs to do as film degrades over time? Why can that not be available? A gold standard for this was something like Star Trek. Now, the original series was restored. I've got the whole box set of it, and all three of these had the same thing, where it says you get the original, but also the enhanced visual effects and audio. So you can choose to watch it as it was aired in 1960s, or you can watch it with new special effects to give it that more modern, crisp, new feel. This is a gold standard for something of how to do a restoration. Have the original available, preserve the original, but also, essentially, you're not erasing what was there before. You can do stuff with the film. I, for one, agree with Cameron. He should be allowed to alter his older films if he chooses to do so. As is the right with George Lucas. If he wants to go and put dinosaurs in front of things and whatever, that was Lucas's right to do. If Spielberg wanted to put walkie-talkies in E.T., even though he reverted on that, then he has the right to do so as the filmmaker and the owner of that content, of the visual content. But by not having the original version as it was originally shown on a disc accompanying this release, that's where a lot of film fans and a lot of collectors draw the line, because you're essentially replacing the older copies and you are saying that this is the definitive way of watching those films now. And that is a massive problem. And that is why I feel 4K is really presenting a lot of issues, moral issues of, is this really the best way to experience it? A lot of people say, oh, well, Blu-ray had issues, DVDs had issues. There were some things that haven't even been transferred since the VHS days. But when you talk about something like Terminator 2, to drastically alter the film and not have what was originally shown accompanied on the same sort of release, have two discs, one for new and improved, one for old, original, that is where preservationists say, no, this is not right. This can't be the way. Like, yes, Cameron has a right to do it, but it shouldn't be that way. And what I'm talking about is, yes, these films belong to Cameron. These Star Wars films belong to Lucas, or at least belonged to Lucas before he sold. And they had the right to do so, but it shouldn't be a situation of you need to have this version or nothing else. There should be the option that you should say, okay, here's something of a new take on this movie. We hope you enjoy it. The option's there. However, if you want a pure cinema experience, how it was shown, that is on disc 2 on a standard Blu-ray. If you must put it on a Blu-ray, do it on the Blu-ray, but have it accompany it. Just say, okay, you have the new version on 4K, but you have the older version on Blu-ray available to you should you choose to go that way. And you might say, but what's the point of buying a 4K Blu-ray at that point? I mean, you can get Terminator 2 on an older format. And you know, something like True Lies in the Abyss, where these haven't been released since the DVD days, obviously the DVD copy is going to have some artifacting and stuff like that when you try to upscale it. But in terms of getting the original intended version, I would say that in situations you might see a bit more detail in the DVD copy because it is an older version. It is a lot closer to what would have been seen in cinemas. And before restoration, it's a pre-restoration. The gold standard for something of restoration is how Star Trek did it. Have the original available, but also have the restoration available. I think that's where restorations need to go. It needs to restore what's there, but it also needs to retain the original as it was intended in cinemas, as it was shown in cinemas. Let me know what you think, guys, and I will get back to you in the next one. Peace.